and then return back to the main menu to select another game if you'd like. Now, the best way to tackle the rest of this game is to run through all of the options it gives you to select. I'll just start with the 6 locations since it's the quickest to explain. The 6 selectable cities are Tokyo, New York, Paris, London, San Francisco, and Moscow. And there's no need to really go in depth on any of them since they all look the same, just with different topography and 4 to 6 landmarks that are distinct from each location. As for the monsters, I'll talk about each one separately, but they all mostly control the same. Up, down, left, and right to move around the map, walking into buildings will damage them, and the option to cycle through 3 actions with 1 button and perform that action with another. 2 of these actions are the same for every monster, a scream that can potentially paralyze vehicles and pedestrians on the ground, and Atomize, which has the potential to eliminate helicopters and airplanes flying overhead. The 3rd action is unique to each monster. The more you use each action, the more time it takes to recharge before you can use it again. First up is Godzilla, is what I'd be saying if he wasn't scrubbed out of this version of the game on the other key. Epix actually had the Godzilla license for this game originally, which I find kind of funny because in Crush, Crumble, and Chomp he was called Goshzilla. But here he was kind of the face of the game. But he's not licensed for this arcade version, so the box art was modified as was the game's title screen. In the game, he was changed from green to brown, and his name was changed to Lizardo, which I guess kind of works because all the other monsters are clearly based on real movie monsters, but have non-copyrighted infringing names attached. Now, Lizardo moves really slow, but is incredibly strong and resilient. His special attack is Fire Breath, which can destroy objects directly in front of him. Next up is Spectra, which I'm guessing is filling in for Mothra. It's the weakest of all the monsters, but is the only one that can fly and moves really fast while in the air. Landing on buildings will destroy them instantly, however, don't land in water as that'll kill you. Aside from flight, Spectra has an extra action, which is a sonic weapon that will instantly eliminate all people and vehicles currently on screen, which comes in really handy at times. Next up is Mr. Meringue, who is filling in for the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. He's pretty much exactly like Lizardo, except slightly faster and a little weaker. His special attack is the Spit Meringue, which lands directly in front of him, doing only some damage. Next is Mechatron, who kind of looks like a Transformer that can't transform. He's strong and resilient like Lizardo, except he can move quite a bit faster. The trade-off is that he can't recover like the other monsters can, and he'll also lose energy if he touches water. His special attack is a laser beam that behaves a lot like Lizardo's Fire Breath. Next is Tarantus, which is a giant spider, and I think there's a few movies out there that feature giant spiders, so I guess it could be like any one of them. He's pretty fast speed-wise, but average in all other stats. But I'm a little disappointed he can't climb up buildings. I mean, he just rams into them like every other monster. His special action is to shoot a web and then retract it along with anything it catches. Now, I saved my favorite for last, and that's the Glog, obviously a stand-in for the Blob. He's got average speed and strength, but he's pretty tough and recovers quicker than any other monster. However, he's the only monster that doesn't have a special action. So what makes him my favorite? Well, he kind of does have a special ability, only it's a passive one that's always active, and that's his acid residue he leaves behind. Oh, you don't see it on screen, but it's there. With all the other monsters, they have to repeatedly ram into a building several times to destroy it. But with the Glog, he can simply touch it and walk away. The acid goes to work, and the building eventually collapses on its own. It's like the monster version of Kenshiro's You're Already Dead. So I've covered the monsters and locations, so the last thing to cover are the scenarios. All scenarios, except for one, will end in one of 2 ways. Your energy will run out and the monster will die in the city, or the monster simply leaves the city before dying, and you kind of want to do that because you'll get a ton of bonus points for escaping alive. The simplest scenario is called Berserk, and it's just causing as much damage to everything and everyone you can for points. Then there's Escape, which places you in the center of the city with an increased military presence, and you've got to get out of there before dying. And depending on the monster you pick, this can be very easy or incredibly difficult. Then there's Lunch, which will have you eating as much as you can to erase your hunger meter and then leave the city. The twist is, every monster has a different favorite food, so if you figure out what it is, you'll be able to leave sooner before losing all of your energy. Next is Destroy Landmark, and the premise for this one is that there's a radio frequency being emitted from one of the city's landmarks, and you've got to find and destroy it using the proximity meter before leaving the city. The last scenario is simply called Search, and I think it's the most interesting of all of them. This is the only scenario where you don't need to leave the city once you're successful. The premise is that your offspring has been captured and is being held in one of the buildings in the city. Like Destroy Landmark, you'll have a proximity meter, but here it'll only work at random times, presumably when the child is crying out for you, which you can sometimes provoke by screaming yourself. What I was not prepared for, though, is once you destroy the building the child is held in, you get to see what he looks like. And I thought it was worth playing the scenario as every monster just to see what their kids look like. I don't know why, I just got a kick out of it. I like the game, but it's definitely not Game of the Year material or anything like that. It does have a pretty slow pace, and it can take a while just to walk around the city, and the boundaries aren't marked at all. So sometimes you'll be walking only for the screen to just blank out and ask if you want to leave the city. It all happens pretty abruptly, and I kind of wish there were markings as to the boundaries of the city before you cross them. It's also the type of game where you need maps of all the cities if you want to know where you're going or what you should be looking for. I've also been a bit disappointed on how limited each of the monsters' actions are. A lot of them play exactly the same with slightly different stats. I like what the game is, but I think Crush, Crumble, and Chomp is much more interesting at the end of the day. Moving on into 1987, we have one of the first games in the epic Street Sports series, Street Sports Baseball. I hadn't played this one before, and I was kind of looking forward to it as I do like baseball games in general. The twist with this one, however, is that it's just a bunch of neighborhood kids playing in your choice of two improvised fields. One being a field littered with trash and the occasional odd object, and the other is a parking lot. Hey, I could totally relate to that as I remember playing ball in an intersection of a street when I was a kid. The corner of each block were the bases. You know, that probably wasn't a smart idea now that I think about it. Anyway, before the game starts, you'll get to pick who you want on your team. You'll pick a kid, then your opponent will pick, then you, and so on and so on. There are 16 kids total, and they each have different strengths and weaknesses. And it's really apparent in the game when you play. Some are fast runners, while some are extremely slow. Some can throw the ball fast, and others may be clumsy fielders. You'll get the details on each kid on the screen as they're highlighted, so there's really no guesswork. But part of the game is figuring out who you want to pick, what position they play, and what the batting order should be. Each kid is uniquely detailed, so they're easy to identify during the game. Now, you may have picked up that I said there were 16 kids total, which means there are 8 kids per team. And since a baseball team normally consists of 9 players, you may be thinking that each team is a player short. Well, the game does away with the catcher, and I suppose it works out somehow with the pitcher covering home base when the ball is in play. During the game itself, there are 2 views of the field. On the left is a big window showing the close-up action, starting with a view from behind the batter, and if the ball is hit, it'll switch to the location to where the ball will end up. The right window will display one of 2 overhead views, a far-away view of the entire field indicating where all the players are, and during a pitch, a closer-up view of just the pitcher and the batter. One thing that was very obvious as I was playing is that the game doesn't really follow all the standard baseball rules. Usually in baseball, if there's a pop fly that's caught by a fielder, any runners on base have to tag the base they were on before trying to advance to the next base if they think they can make it. However, in this game, all the runners will just start running to the next base as soon as the ball is hit, and at first I was like, hey, now wait a minute, you have to wait to see if the fielder catches the ball before running to the next base. But then I was surprised to see all the runners just teleport back to the base they were on if the ball is caught, and I thought that was kind of strange. Additionally, if a player can cross home base before the fielder can catch the ball,